Good morning and welcome to our fourth Sister Cities Conference. My name is Joe Simperman. I'm with Global Cleveland. I want to just first give a incredible, heartfelt, deep, warm, and genuine thanks to the best library in the world, our Cleveland Public Library. When we were beginning this conversation 4 years ago, the first time any city has ever attempted this, to bring together all 24, now because of our outstanding mayor, 25 sister cities and growing. Director Felton Thomas said, why don't we do it at the library? The library, which is a place of welcoming people from all communities, a library that has an outstanding foreign language section on the 4th floor, one of the best truly in the United States, and a library director who sees his role as a city builder. So Director Thomas, to you and your team, we couldn't be more appreciative. This really has a home here, and for that we're very grateful, so thank you. Our Sister City Conference this year is focusing on economic development and educational exchange. We are blessed to have a mayor who is a leader in both of those fields in our country. Mayor Bibb has not been in office longer than a year, and already our team has had more interaction with him and more incredible conversations and deep and meaningful relationships built that we know these next 3 years, hopefully 4 after that, will continue to be an amazing experience of how Cleveland sees itself in the world and how the world sees Cleveland. We are so lucky that 7 of our sister cities have sent delegations here to Cleveland. And we're joined today by our mayor from Bahir Dar. Mayor, we are so grateful to you for being here. Welcome to Cleveland from the wonderful nation of Ethiopia. We hope for many more returns. We're joined by a delegate here from Vicenza, Italy. We're so grateful to Vicenza, Italy. We're also joined by Gdansk, Poland, Lithuania, Slovenia, and Hungary. And we will be having a lot of conversations with our other sister cities virtually, as many places and people are looking at their schedules and making sure that we can participate. This opening plenary begins with the mayor of the city of Cleveland, someone who has injected electricity and life into our city, but someone who knows personally the experience of living abroad. And for him and for his stewardship to the city of Cleveland, please help me welcome Mayor Justin Bibb.
Thank you so much, Joe, and to the entire Global Cleveland staff. And before I deliver my opening remarks, why don't we just take a few moments of silence for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. Thank you. It truly is an honor to be here at the 4th Sister Cities Conference, and I also want to just recognize the leadership of Joe Simperman and the entire board of Global Cleveland. They are an amazing asset to the city. I've seen it firsthand in my first 10 months as mayor, because I believe almost every other week I'm hosting a delegation in the Red Room. So let's give Joe and the entire board a round of applause. And to my fellow 23 mayors that are here in person and joining us virtually abroad, I think we all recognize that collaboration is everything in our jobs. Particularly in America, we've seen the challenges facing our nation come right to our doorsteps as mayor. Everything from making sure we have a climate that respects climate justice and sustainability, to making sure we have an economy that works for everybody in our respective cities, to making sure that we model what good democratic behavior looks like. All those issues fall on our front doorsteps as mayors. And this peer exchange of ideas, this collaboration between our respective cities and our respective countries is so important now more than ever as America and the world confronts so many challenges. And as Joe mentioned, I saw firsthand the importance of getting experience abroad. I got my first passport when I was a senior in high school. I was in a youth group at Fellowship Bible Church in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, and I went on a missions trip to play basketball in Taiwan. Now, I learned a couple things on that trip. First, I learned that everyone thought I was Michael Jordan. Obviously, it didn't turn out well for me on the basketball front. But the second thing I learned is that there is so much we have in common, whether you live in America or Taiwan or London or Kenya. And in that experience abroad, for a working class black kid from Cleveland Southeast Side, my whole world opened up. A whole world of possibilities. I imagine myself maybe being a diplomat one day, or doing business abroad, or even playing a sport abroad because of that experience. And so making sure that we give young people more experiences abroad is so important. Making sure that we continue to educate our children in our schools about what's happening abroad is so critical. But also making sure that Cleveland is a welcoming place for our refugees and immigrants is critical. And we are working around the clock at City Hall to support our immigrant and refugee community with good housing, with critical multi-language access to important city services, because I believe that Cleveland can truly be the most inclusive city, not just in America, but across the world. And that is our mandate at City Hall every single day. So again, on behalf of the great city of Cleveland, thank you for having me, and I look forward to the continued work ahead. Appreciate you so much. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bibb. We really appreciate that. Great words to kick off today's events. And good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here at Global Cleveland's 2022 Sister Cities Conference. My name is Rachel Rude. I'm the supervising producer of Cleveland NPR's morning public affairs program, The Sound of Ideas, which airs at 89.7 WKSU weekdays at 9 a.m., which means I'm about to be very late for work this morning. But I'm thrilled to be here to play hooky for a bit to help guide this conversation of the opening plenary. Before we get started, I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank our speakers today. I also want to thank the sponsors and donors who have made the Sister Cities possible this year. Our sponsors are Eaton Corporation, SwageLock, Cleveland Hungarian Development Panel, the University of Akron, the Cleveland Rotary Club, the Lithuanian American Community Cleveland Chapter, the Slovenian Museum and Archives, the City of Cleveland, and Cleveland Public Library. We're grateful to have 3 leaders up here with us to open this conference. First is Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the U.S. State Department. She was also the longest-serving U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Malta, and she's a Cleveland native, Cleveland Heights, actually. Thanks so much for being with us. And if you guys want to just hit that button on the bottom of your microphone, that'll turn it on. We also have Felton Thomas, Director of Cleveland Public Library, which is graciously hosting this conference. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
And we have Joe Simperman, President of Global Cleveland. Thank you so much for joining us. The past 2.5 years of the pandemic have shown that we must all adapt to change rather than try to fit into old systems. We've also seen the importance of connection, both to one another and globally. We're here at this conference today to celebrate and deepen Cleveland's international ties and diplomacy. Cleveland has 23 sister cities, which connect us across the globe to places like Taipei City, Taiwan, to Beit Shan, Israel, to the other Cleveland in the United Kingdom. But we also have a whole melting pot of new residents from countries like Ukraine and Afghanistan living right here in Northeast Ohio. This morning, I want to talk with the leaders on the stage about the economic and cultural benefits of embracing our international newcomers. We'll learn how having a diverse international community is critical to growing and strengthening our region, especially during the challenges we all face. In preparing for this conversation, I asked Global Cleveland to provide some statistics that would help us all understand just how big our international community is in Ohio and in our region specifically. And here are some of those facts. 1, Ohio is one of the top 10 states for resettling refugees year after year, with 65,000 refugees currently living in the state. 2, Ohio is one of the top 3 states for attracting international students after New York and California. More than 40,000 international students are currently in the state. And 3, between 2010 and 2020, almost 38,000 immigrants in Northeast Ohio have become naturalized. We'll learn more about our international community as we continue this discussion. And just so you guys all know, on The Sound of Ideas, which is a show I produce, we take questions and comments throughout the conversation. So If you have a thought you'd like to share or a question you'd like to ask our panel, please just raise your hand or come to the microphone up here. You'll see over there we've got a staff member who's willing to help you with getting to the microphone. And we would love to have you be part of this conversation, not just at the end, but throughout. All right, let's get to it. Joe, let's start with you. Can you first share how the Sister Cities Conference came to be? And is this the first time it's been in person in a while?
It feels like it. Thank
Yeah.
you. And to our ambassador and our director, thank you so much for your participation and leadership and inspiration. It was great to hear, and I had to think to myself, when Mayor Bibbs said he got his passport at the age of 18, I think that probably had a big role to play in why he's our mayor today. And I think it's very, it's a lesson well told. 4 years ago, we began the Sister City Conference because we kept hearing from people, what are we doing with these incredible relationships? Cleveland is a city of refugees. Cleveland is a city of migrants, secondary migrants, immigrants, international students. It's also a city of great diasporas from all over the world. And when you look at the flags outside, you know, you can look at community leader after community leader. Akli's here from the Ethiopian community, who has led so many important conversations. But we also have local leaders who were born in the United States, who are incredible leaders in their own right, like Mayor Blackwell from Maple Heights, who has an international mind and wanting to see what we can do to build those bridges. It's important to note, and this is part of Sister City lore, that the original Sister City idea by President Eisenhower began when he was the general, liberating the concentration and labor camps that Nazi Germany had fomented. And he had seen the incredible cruelty to humankind by humankind. And he felt a governor, a government, a president, a prime minister is never going to fix that. It has to happen person to person. So in 1956, in his presidential administration, there was already an idea happening of twinning cities, but President Eisenhower took it to the next level of saying, we have to do and be more for each other, right? Citizen to citizen diplomacy. And we see what's happening in Ukraine. It's ever more important. So we wanted to do this conference because we wanted to do three things. The first thing was to move from the latent to the blatant. Internationalism in Cleveland is so much a part of who we are. You know, Ambassador knows this, Director Thomas knows this. We have entire, you know, studies and floors of libraries dedicated to it, but we take it for granted. And we don't want to do that. We want it to be at the forefront. The second thing is, to be a Clevelander is to be a person in the constant question of identity. Who are we? Are we East Side or West Side? Do we understand our African American sisters and brothers and work and fight with and for them, or don't we? Do we have ties to the fact that 100 years ago, Cleveland had more than half of its population born outside of the United States, and English was a learning language? Or do we think that we've all been here since the Mayflower landed, and even before that with the indigenous people? And then the third thing I think was, there's a lot of economic development opportunity and educational exchange possible. We have a goal at Global Cleveland, our team is gonna kill me, but by 2030, that every student graduating from Cleveland Public Schools will have a passport, right?
Wow.
We wanna see the future Mayor Bibbs and ambassadors and directors in places like this, and we think travel's an important part of that. And so what this conference does is it takes something maybe that's a little bit invisible and it puts it in the forefront.
That's so interesting. Thank you so much, Joe, for explaining that. Felton, under your leadership, Cleveland Public Library has been a partner for Global Cleveland and Sister Cities Conference since its beginning 4 years ago. How did this partnership come about, and why is it something that you wanted the library to be involved with?
So the partnership really came from probably my friendship with Joe and understanding what Joe wanted to do and seeing how the library can be supportive of that. And Joe, this is one thing that you may not know, but we will certainly be supportive of you in the fact that libraries do provide passports. So when the young people are ready to get their passport, just send them to their local library and they can get their passports. But it was the reality that we do have one of the largest collection of materials in other languages in the state. And we wanted to make sure that our community recognized we've done that over a period of time, because we've been their library for 153 years here in the city of Cleveland. And we've seen many different immigrant communities come through that period of time. And we've always been there for them. And we will continue to be there for them. And so the partnership with Global Cleveland just seemed like the smartest thing to do.
That's great. Ambassador, like I mentioned, you're a Cleveland native, but your career has brought you all over the world. I'm curious about whether your experience growing up in Cleveland has had any impact on your international experiences abroad or even your career aspirations.
Absolutely. Cleveland opened your eyes to the world, without a doubt. Going to school, I attended Cleveland Public Schools, schools in Shakers, schools in Cleveland Heights, but foreign language was required to graduate from high school, and I took mine, which was Hebrew, because why not? And
I learned Hebrew too growing up.
there you go. Okay, we've got a conversation coming. And then as a sophomore in college, going to Tel Aviv University for a year abroad of study to deepen the language and see where that language came from and the culture, etc. So that came from Geveret Stuhl in 10th grade, opening my eyes to the language and another part of the world. So definitely launched from Cleveland. And going then from college and Peace Corps and then into the Diplomatic Corps was a very straight line for me, because as you do more, you see more, experience more, and understanding the background here, that allows me to be a very good diplomat. We have great diplomats from Ohio in the State Department. So
That's so great. I also was curious if you could tell us, is there a global perception and reputation of Ohio and Northeast Ohio? And if so, what have you experienced in the international stage?
yes, I think the knowledge of the United States I have found in my travels is great. And I might say, might shame a few Americans who don't know our history as well as some people overseas do. But certainly the knowledge of the Midwest as a manufacturing giant for many years, propelling the economic growth of the United States, is widely known. Certainly Cleveland, and I've spent most of my career in the Middle East, is very well known because of the Cleveland Clinic. And many of my interlocutors, both in private, personal friends, as well as government officials from countries in which I've served, have come to Cleveland for healthcare. So it has a very big footprint internationally, certainly in the Middle East. And of course, there's a new campus in London as well, so it's spreading.
That's great. And Joe, I want to talk about our international community here that lives in Northeast Ohio. Let's start with one of those stats I mentioned earlier, that we're one of the top states for resettling refugees. The current crises in Ukraine and Afghanistan meant that our region helped resettle a lot of people from those regions. Can you talk about those two examples specifically?
With regard to Afghanistan, we began to welcome people from Afghanistan. We can trace it back to 2004, 2005. When the United States first engaged in the activity that was occurring in Afghanistan. So the community started to build. And there's two ways that refugees get placed. One is through a more random process. The second, and I'm oversimplifying it, but the second is with people who know people in those communities where they're going to be relocated to. So it made sense when the situation started to become untenable for people in Kabul that Cleveland would be a place where they would come. We were told by our leadership and incredible leadership at the Department of State that Cleveland was going to get about 450 people, which was so until, I'll give you a great example, Bakht, who was relocated here, had been embedded with the United States Marine Corps, fluent in 4 different languages, knows how to do a lot of things like computer program, worked with USAID. He and his wife and his 3 children were relocated here. All of his brothers and cousins were relocated to San Diego. Within 2 months, 18 people left San Diego to come to Cleveland.
Wow.
State Department doesn't have a clicker at the Ohio border saying, oh, we got 18 more. It just happens. And so we started to see that number grow and grow. And because of organizations like Catholic Charities, Us Together, United States Committee on Refugees and Immigrants, the primary resettlers, and then the secondaries, Refugee Response, Building Hope in the City, Asia, Ohio, and Neighborhood Family Practice, it created an environment where people who were from Afghanistan would not only feel welcome, but be able to find a job and get what they needed. Ukraine's a little bit different. We started seeing people from Ukraine pretty soon after the war began, and most of them were coming up from the southern border. and they were all women and grandmas, moms and grandmas and kids. And we can tell you story after story. The Ukrainian legal clinic that we had in Parma, where we counted at least 8 different visas that people are here on, but they know Ukraine, they know Parma, and they know Northeast Ohio and Ukraine. And so they're coming here because they know that they're gonna have people who speak their language and who are welcoming. Just 2 weeks ago, Zachary Nelson, my colleague who's fluent Ukrainian and Russian, was asked to go to North Royalton to speak to 90 parents because they had no English proficiency and their kids were starting school.
Wow.
This is the reality of immigration in Northeast Ohio, and it's an incredibly great reality, right? These are people in crisis, but we have the infrastructure and the commitment to welcome people. But let's be honest, and this is the thing that I think all the time about immigration, we can't look at it as a social service charity. We need talent, we need innovation, we need diversity. It's what makes this country and our region thrive. Somebody said something to me today about how lucky they were that Northeast Ohio had given them so much. This person's parents were born in Mexico. I said to this person, on the contrary, we're so lucky that you're spending your talents and your treasure here. And that's the lens that we want to look at the international community, and the people in this audience and the people who are going to be part of this conference for 3 days absolutely live that reality.
That's so true. I just want to invite our audience again, if you guys have any questions or comments, please come up to the microphone. Allison is there to help you. But I think this idea of how we view the international community is so interesting, because I think there's a lot of sort of misconceptions going on out there of, what do international residents bring to our communities? I'm curious, Felton, as someone who the library is such a touch point for some of these new residents, can you talk about like what you see the library being used for by these residents, and also what they bring to the community?
Well, for many of the community members who are from other countries, they don't have the same experience with libraries in the way that we do.
Oh,
libraries are very different. In some countries, they don't have libraries. In other countries, you have to pay to get access to libraries. So to be able to come to a library and have access to the library and be able to use it like everyone else, it is first an eye-opener. We have to kind of bring them in and gain their trust. But once they use our libraries, they recognize that there's a stepping stone for them to success from using their library, whether it's coming in and taking ESL classes and getting prepared for their knowledge of English, or just being able to feel comfortable and being able to get access to materials like their magazines and movies and other things in their own language, so they just feel more comfortable here in the United States and in Cleveland. I wanted to share a story about how the communities and other places have come and shared and changed the lives of our own Clevelanders in a way. And I'll share this quick story about I went on an Adler mission to Israel, right? And we went to Beit Shan, Israel. And they were like, you've got to see our library, right? And so I go into their library, and their library is very much like a normal library, except for everyone I see are young people. They're all under 16, and they're all working behind desks. And I'm like, okay, where are all the adults here? And they were like, no, these are the staff. All the kids were working at all of the desks. And I said, well, where's the head librarian? And they go and they take me into the back, into the office. And there's the head librarian. He's an adult. He's got his legs up as he's sitting back and reading. And I'm like, this guy is the smartest guy in the world, right? He's got all the kids doing work, or he's just the laziest guy in the world, right? So he kind of gets out of his seat and he says, yes, this is our library, and it's run by our young people. The youngest is 10, the oldest is 17, and they run every aspect of the library, do everything they need, the library does for it. And I'm like, okay. And he says, this is how they learn. This is an opportunity for them to run it the way they want. I don't do anything. I just let them run it. I just make sure they don't burn the place down, right? And I'm like, I don't get this system. But after I stayed there for a while and started kind of seeing them, because they did a big program that night, and it was run completely by the young people, and their parents were so proud of them, and they learned the transition of how to deal with it. They had a hierarchy where their older kids told the younger kids, who told the younger kids how to do things. And the important thing around that was it showed how in the United States we don't give kids agency to make decisions. So when I came back, I said, we're going to do that at one of our libraries. And so we gave basically control over some of our aspects to a young panel. And then we start connecting them with the kids in Beit Shan. And then they started talking, and then the kids from Beit Shan would come to the United States and meet these kids. These are kids in Cleveland who've never been anywhere in the world, who did not know anything about, being Jewish or being in Israel. And so they started partnering and they started becoming friends. And so the second time they came, they knew each other. They were like hanging out, and I got a chance to go over it. They're out there teaching each other dances and doing all these crazy stuff that kids do. But the kids who are our kids here in Cleveland are running programs. We're allowing them to do that. They call themselves the Value Teens. They create parades for their seniors and do all of that. And it's such a factor of how our kids need to see what other kids across the country, in other countries are doing.
Wow, I think I've heard of the Value Teens. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh man, learning from each other, that's great. Ambassador, let me get to this page. So I wanted to ask you about your current role in the State Department, which is focused on diversity and inclusion. We are talking about how new residents are, being welcomed in Cleveland, but, last month we saw nearly 50 Venezuelan migrants who were sent to Martha's Vineyard from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. We talk about ever-changing times. There's this real push against being welcoming to immigrants in many corners of this country. I'm just curious, how do you navigate these different and changing worldviews that are happening not just in the United States, but across the globe?
Yeah, we're at a really interesting point where there is a lot of pressure to do much better in our country as well as around the world with inclusion and diversity and accessibility and equity in how our governments are run, how we conduct ourselves with each other. And then there is this push against it. And the push against it, I believe, strongly comes from fear and lack of knowledge, and providing additional knowledge helps with the fear. Our definition of inclusion is broad, and certainly we are an organization that has benefited from it. Our new head of populations, refugees, and migrations was a refugee from Cuba. And she is able to give back in this way. Just as Joe was mentioning, we are grateful for the talent and treasure that people come and bring to this country. So we have many people in the United States State Department, our diplomats, many who were not born in the United States, but are fully American and help us improve our foreign policy because they bring a much wider perspective of the world that we, growing up in the United States, we've got certain views, certain experiences that give us our worldview. But in understanding the rest of the world and helping us build peace, maintain peace, encourage peace, means that a broader array of perspectives is needed. So people who come from countries that have had to deal with conflict certainly are going to have a powerful and important voice as we navigate and figure out ways to help ameliorate conflict. Those who come from countries that have different rights and responsibilities for citizens, again, will help us find that entree when we're making our bilateral relationships. Where is that understanding? Those who speak a language as a native language in addition to English are going to be helpful. For first generation immigrants are warmly, wildly welcomed into the Department of State as Americans to represent our nation to the rest of the world. So.
On those lines, Joe, another stat from your organization about the international community is 1 in 5 immigrants or entrepreneurs are immigrants. And 44% of Fortune 500 companies are founded by immigrants or their children. So when we talk about this population and why it's important to be welcoming, it's not just like you were saying, like social services. It's, these are people who are creating jobs and actually strengthening our economy.
Yeah, through the lens of economic development, and the ambassador and director knows this, and Mayor Bibb, lives it every day. Ohio's, one of Ohio's largest trading partners is the nation of Canada, $14 billion of trade. One of our second highest trading partners is the nation of Mexico, $11 billion worth of trade, right? International relations aren't just something where, we need to welcome international newcomers and make sure they know that Cleveland is their home. It's also a matter of, do we want to survive and thrive as a region and as a state? We've been talking to the governor's folks and the folks at Team NEO and Jobs Ohio, because Ohio is the third highest welcomer and educator of international students in the union. 45,000 people right now came from outside the United States and are studying at Bowling Green, Cleveland State, Case Western, Ohio State, Wayne State, name the school in Ohio. 45,000. We are third only to New York and California. Now, when you look at the end, when they graduate, when they've got this talent that's been cultivated and this gift that has been realized, we are in the bottom third for keeping them. And somebody said, oh, they're going home. Well, a lot of our Chinese students are. They're going home. There's a life for them back home. But many of our other students want to stay here. They're not going home. Where are they going? They're going to New York and California. And that's unacceptable. That is unacceptable. Ohio is good enough to educate, to train, to create some of the best surgeons and engineers, whoever she or he is. We have to change our cultural, economic, and corporate structure that's good enough to say, we got to find you a job, right? And, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not ambassador or director, but we're a place that's dealing with a lot of uncomfortabilities. We're coming to terms with racism in our city and our country. It doesn't mean that we also can't look at our xenophobia. And I find that the most uncomfortable places in America are the places where growth is most likely. And as long as we can continue to maintain our fight to make our city more equitable for all of our citizens, African American, Latino, immigrant, and people who are throughout the community, and as long as we continue to be welcoming, I think the statistics that people think about Cleveland in terms of our poverty and our struggles are going to change, but we have to live in that uncomfortability. We also have to be okay with failing. The one thing that I learned, and I didn't know, Ambassador, that you were in Tel Aviv, and when Director Thomas and I were in Tel Aviv as well, or the Adler mission, there was this big saying on the wall, and it was in Hebrew. So Rachel and Ambassador, I won't murder the language, but it was basically fail faster. We don't do that in Cleveland enough. We want a home run every time. Go up there, give it your all, see what you've got, and see where it goes. And I think a lot of times our international community, between the four of us on stage and our audience, they get it, right? Because to immigrate is an entrepreneurial act. Their being here is a testament to how they make it and survive. And I wish that sometimes Cleveland would just close her eyes and be okay with just go.
Just on that point of xenophobia, do you find that there are communities or leaders in Cleveland or Northeast Ohio that you're seeing that pushback? Like, we don't necessarily want to be as welcoming as Cleveland is. Like, are you seeing that? Is it something that's very present here?
When I look at Mayor Bibb, I look at our county executive, I look at Ron Richard from the Cleveland Foundation, Beju Shaw, GCP, Bill Kaler, they live and preach the feeling of this conference. But I'm not going to name names, and I'm looking at my team. We were at a pretty big meeting with a very important organization and a young white woman who I believe has a master's and who is highly versed in many things. We were talking about the importance of immigrants, and she leaned over and she said, but aren't you worried about them taking our jobs? And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that one coming. You're not an old white man. You're not somebody who called our office threatening us during the Afghanistan crisis. I'm going to say it, you're one of us. And so it's a reality, and Ambassador said it best, it's out of fear. And how do we address that? by exposing people to other people. Full disclosure here, as we begin the Sister City Conference, the stage is going to be taken in about an hour with about 80 people becoming US citizens, naturalization. I challenge anyone who's a US citizen to take the test. I can't crack 80. Ambassador says it best. We should be mindful of our own history as others are. But we had at one of our Sister City conferences, we had a naturalization ceremony, and a gentleman came in a leather jacket with a motorcycle club insignia and long hair, and I thought, oh God, where's security? Right? There I am, Mr. Judgmental. And I went up to him and I said, can I help you? And he said, no, I'm here for Cookie. I said, who's Cookie? He said, she's my neighbor. That's my nickname for her. We've known each other for 20 years. She was a refugee from Burma, his words, not mine, Myanmar. And he said, I'm here for her because this is the proudest day for her. I judged him. I looked at his outfit and thought that. And meanwhile, I'm sitting next to this young woman. She's asking me if they're going to take our jobs. It's an everyday, each conversation process.
Wow, thanks for sharing that.
Well, and Rachel, to that point, what Joe's talking about is historic in the city. I was reading an archival story of the library in 1920 when one of our libraries pulled groups of community members together because they were not out, they were, pushing back on some of the immigrants that were coming from Yugoslavia and the other countries during that period of time who were coming to the United States in Ohio City. And so the Carnegie West Library pulled all of the Irish and Italian immigrants together to welcome them, and they asked them to cook for these immigrants so they could pull them together. And so they had this kind of program of baking food from each of their communities. They brought all the women together and the young kids together to try to bring that community together. That's historic, and that's how what we see what we can do as libraries of trying to convene the communities together just so they get to know each other. And sometimes it's just about eating.
I love that so much. And to that point, I don't know if we as a region hype up as much the Cleveland Cultural Gardens that we have in our community. And I don't know if anyone's ever been to One World Day, but that is such a great event to experience all the different cultures in our community and eat their food and hear their music. And it's just such a great event. So I just wanted to bring that up. Ambassador, and then I just wanted to go real quick back to the naturalization ceremony, because that's another thing that's happening at the library. And I understand, or that's happening today at 11 o'clock this morning, right? And Felton, I wanted to ask, how have you helped the library become a more inclusive place, especially for international people?
Well, I think, the naturalization ceremonies this will be our third naturalization ceremony that we're doing, is a prime example of us finding ways, always, to bring different communities together. Because that's what the library is. We're the People's University here. That's our tagline as our library. And what we say about that is, it's not our house, it's people's house, right? And we have lots of different people who are here. So wherever community, we have lots of different celebrations, whether it's for Lunar New Year or other programs. And we welcome everyone to be able to use their spaces in their communities in that way. What's very interesting, though, is it's always an opportunity for us to teach. When we built our new Rice Library, all the community members around that library are African American. But one of the things they said is the people who used to live here, whose houses we lived in, were different immigrants, and we want you to find a way to represent them in the new library. So we created some of our artwork for some of the immigrant communities that were there. And they were appreciated because they wanted to know what was the life of those folks who lived in their homes that they now live in.
I have to add, if anyone has the opportunity to stay and observe the naturalization ceremony, it is such a privilege to watch new Americans. It's amazing. So I know it's one of the most exciting, joyful things to observe. So if you can stay for it.
That's great. Thank you, Ambassador. You have such a rich history of doing so much in the world through your career of 30 years of diplomacy. I wanted to ask you about a specific assignment where you were tasked with actively supporting gender equality in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as the first woman to lead a diplomatic mission there. I'm curious just what a challenge that must have been diplomatically.
I say a privilege, a privilege.
And a privilege.
Yes. To go to a country where women at the time, because the situation is certainly better now for many, were second-class citizens, absolutely not in public spaces. You didn't see panels like this there, and being the first one through the door, which, as I said, is a privilege and also a burden, because you are the first one through the door and you carry the weight of getting it right every time you go through that door. As a diplomat, as a Clevelander, as a woman of color, I got it right most of the time, but not all the time. And it's important to acknowledge nobody's perfect. And as you go through making your way, trying to bring attention and voice to women, because it is our American values and culture, and doing it in a respectful way. That's the balance that can be tricky at times. So I'm thinking about times, as I said, that I didn't get it right, but most of the time we did. My staff and I, we did, and I think helped leave lasting change. We did a lot of work on breast cancer, on drug rehabilitation, English language, supporting women entrepreneurs. The women who were part of the Chamber of Commerce, we met, we supported with. We were a convener, as the library is here and in many places around the States. U.S. embassies are U.S. sovereign territory, and whereas it would have been unacceptable for women and men to meet in public spaces, I could host them in my home because it was America. And I think of one story where we had an expert from the United States visiting Saudi Arabia in special education. And she had been traveling around the country and meeting with mostly girls' schools, but also meeting in special places with boys' schools and leaders who were managing special education. And I hosted a dinner for about 30 people, because it was a nice big house, sit-down dinner, and there were men and women, Saudis, in the field of special education, leaders, practitioners, who had never met each other before, who had had phone conversations or email exchanges, but never seen each other, and had the ability to have conversations and work out issues and talk about methods of addressing challenges in their field. And I was going, my family had been evacuated from Saudi for security reasons at that point, and I was flying out to London to see my husband and children. The dinner started at about 8 p.m., and my flight was at 1 a.m., and at midnight I said, okay, you all can stay, but I gotta go. And I left them all in my home because that opportunity of exchange of knowledge and meeting and friendship in a level playing field that the United States of America provided was so important. I knew I had to leave. I don't know what time I left my house, but that is something, as an American diplomat, that's something that you can do, and you know every day what you do, how you do it has impact on people's lives, and there's no better job. I do want to add, you do not need a college education to join the U.S. Diplomatic Corps. We have an exam process, and that's it. The person who made it to a senior level in my class of 52, the first person to get to the senior level was someone with a high school education, but very well traveled and had worked and learned languages as he traveled. High school education, so.
That's amazing. I also just, I can't help thinking about the demonstrations that are going on in Iran right now that so many, women and leaders across the world are sort of in support of. What is it, going through that experience in Saudi Arabia, what does it sort of bring up for you in terms of like seeing women are still being persecuted around the world?
Well, women have challenges all around the world, holding on to rights and agency over their bodies and being required to dress a particular way if you don't want to dress that particular way. And I hasten to add that because my experience of being in Saudi Arabia for 3 years, where while I was there, hijab was required and abaya was required. And there were women who did not want to wear it, but there were women who did want to wear it. And that freedom is to wear it or not wear it. That's your choice. So watching these demonstrations, 2 things I have been reminded of. A, that women's voices must be heard, that we deserve autonomy over our bodies and persons and should not be dictated to any more than men should be dictated to. But also that the demonstrations in Iran are not just about a headscarf, and that it's important for us to keep this in mind as we watch what is happening, that there are an array of grievances, as there are, frankly, in many parts of the world. We have a restive population as we are trying to either pull back from the mistakes we've made already. Mr. Simperman mentioned climate, and I'm going to foot stomp that one in particular, because my children and my children's children and yours are all going to be dealing with the mess that we have made and are making until we turn the corner on that. But also many other issues that are affecting families and men at various levels. And so keep in mind what we're watching is not just one issue. It's the catalyst that set it off, and no one should ever estimate the power of women to speak up and march and advocate for our rights.
Hear, hear. Joe, we only have a couple more minutes in this conversation, so I just wanted to ask you, what changes do you want to see for the international community here in Cleveland, and how do the people on stage help you accomplish that?
Thank you. I got it. Thank you, Ambassador. Obviously, having our ambassador here, who's a Cleveland native, who's leading so many incredibly important missions abroad and domestically, is something I think that is important for our international community to see. The director of our library is a fundamental American democratic little D institution, and yet the director has made this a window to the world. It doesn't have to be exotic. You don't have to buy a plane ticket. There doesn't have to be a stamp on a passport for people to be internationally engaged. One of the reasons why we're so grateful for our Italian sister city, Vicenza, our Ethiopian sister city, Bahir Dar, our Hungarian sister city, Miskolc, our Slovenian sister city, Ljubljana, Slovenia, our Klaipėda, Lithuania sister city. Why it's so important is there are economic development opportunities that are happening every day that we're not realizing. And, now in the age of Zoom and email, our consul general from Lithuania was going to be speaking this morning. She got called to Vilnius, Lithuania. She didn't think anything of it. We need to be more like that in Cleveland. We need to look at it not as I'm Irish on St. Patrick's Day, I'm Mexican on Cinco de Mayo, when it's time for Dingus Day, I'm Polish, and I'm Slovenian on Korentovania. That's great. Where is the next Intel coming? Where's the next Sherwin-Williams? Where's the next, entrepreneurial idea between a young African-American girl who's studying at John Hay right now and a young man in Bahir Dar that are going to create the cure to a disease we don't even know yet? That's where this has to be. And the whole purpose of Sister Cities for me is, how do we make this international experience a verb? I could listen to speeches all day, but you've got actors like our ambassador and our director who are thinking, how do I put internationalism in play? And how do I make it mean something to people in Cleveland? That's what I hope for.
That is so great. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time to speak to us and kick off this conference. I want to thank our panelists, Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winstanley, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the U.S. State Department. Thank you so much, Gina. Ambassador. And Felton Thomas, thank you, Director of the Cleveland Public Library. Thank you so much. And of course, Joe Simperman, President of Global Cleveland, thank you so much for being with us. And once again, I would like to thank the sponsors and donors who made this conference and panel possible. They are Eaton Corporation, Swagelok, Cleveland Hungarian Development Panel, the University of Akron, Cleveland Rotary Club, Lithuanian American Community, Slovenian Museum and Archives. We've got a fan. The next panel starts at 9:15 on the second floor Learning Commons. This virtual discussion will center on architecture and city design and will feature speakers from Vicenza, Italy, Ljubljana, Slovenia, and of course, Cleveland. Following that discussion will be the official opening of an exhibition sponsored by the Slovenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Culture, featuring the work of Slovenia's most famous architect, Joza Plečnik, in the atrium. My name's Rachel Root. I'm with WKSU Idea Stream Public Media. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.